tears streaked and crying. And I think we all felt vulnerable, even us in the cities, even us in other parts of the countries, we all felt vulnerable as we saw our people suffering. We couldn't imagine what they'd been through. But that was just one day. For many of us, the trauma continued as we rebuilt our lives, as we were kept from our towns, as we watched those around us suffer. Partners in lives of emergency service workers, things were really quite tough. The service workers had stayed in the town while others had left and seen terrible things. They felt responsible in many cases. If you wear the label of firefighter and you cannot fight the fire, there's a guilt attached to that. And even though they knew it wasn't their fault, they felt that guilt. They could not do the impossible. My husband Joe was a DSE firefighter. He stayed in Marysville as it burned. He was very close to losing his life. He wandered through the smoke and the flames, picking up survivors and finding those that hadn't. These people were not strangers. They were our friends. Their faces, both living and dead, haunted him. When Joe came out of Marysville with a convoy of survivors, he was in shock. He was shut down. I hadn't seen him since we fled. I ran to him and I threw my arms around him, and normally he would have bent down and kissed me on my head and tell me that everything was okay, but I hugged a statue. I hugged a petrified man. We spent one night together, and when he thought that I was asleep, he cried. He cried, he sobbed. He couldn't begin to process what had happened. And I lay there quietly and I let him have his privacy. And I realised I could never possibly understand what he'd seen. And the next morning he put on his dirty uniform and he went out to fight the fires again. And me and the children went down to town and we were out without him again. The next month is a blur. I'm in shock. Joe was completely shut down. We hardly spoke. He's up all night on the computer, drinking. We kept out of Marysville, and for the survivors, being kept out of the town was a terrible thing. We couldn't begin to process what had happened, and we couldn't begin to grieve, and we couldn't begin to reclaim our lives. Joe goes from bad to worse. We moved into rental accommodation, and he puts himself in one room and me in another. And he says, if this door is closed, don't even knock on it. Don't let the kids knock on it when I'm in there. Don't come in. He won't talk to his children. He won't meet their eyes. He's scared that they'll see something in him and feel insecure. He's unravelling. I try to get him help, but I'm banned from talking to work. He's afraid he'll lose his job. He unravels. He unravels. I call his boss anyway, and she says that there's nothing they can do. If he won't take the help, they can't make him. And I tell him what I've done and he gets angry, so incredibly angry. He stands above me, he uses his size to intimidate me, he shouts in my face, screaming with rage and unspoken grief. Frankly, I begin to be relieved when he is in his room. I know our marriage is crumbling, but I still beg him, get help, get medication, do something baby. And he threatens to leave. I put myself on my knees before him and beg him not to go. I know he's ill. I can't help him if he doesn't stay. I'm his wife. He's my responsibility. I want him well. I want him his old self again. I miss him. But just before Christmas, he's beyond me. He slipped past me like sand through my fingers, and I realise I can't save him. He leaves on New Year's Eve. And that's when things get really scary. One minute he wants our old life back, and the next minute he's screaming with rage and fear and guilt. He turns up drunk in the middle of the night and bangs on the door, and the children are scared and they're all sleeping in my bed. This is a man that's never been violent before. He never put his hands on me through all of this. But the way he's interacting with me now is completely new. He's never used his masculinity as a force, as a tool to control me or to inject fear into me. I'm beginning to unravel now. I'm crying uncontrollably. The sense of who I am is undermined. I've been with this man since I'm 18. Every adult neuron in my head has developed to be his wife, to be his partner, to be his best friend. Who am I without him? And after a while, and with some help of some very dear people, I decide that that's enough. And he's okay at first. It's almost a relief of burden. But then he unravels again and there's a suicide attempt. He texts me and he texts my son, Sam, who's 12 at the time, that he's going to do it. And so I run to where he's staying and he lets me in the room and I see a rope strung up. And he says, I've just got you here so you can be sure what I'm going to do next. And he pushes me backwards out the door, locks it, and I can hear him getting up on a chair. And I call the police, but I know they're 10 minutes away, and I scream for help for the other people in the temporary village, and they come and I create a distraction, and the police get there on time. And he's sectioned under the Mental Health Act. But he still has his mobile phone, and as he's being driven down, he texts me, "You will die by my hands, bitch. I will punch every tooth out of your head." Never in 19 years of marriage has he ever been violent. This is not the man I know. He looks like my Joe. He smells, he moves, he sounds like my Joe. But he isn't. My Joe died in the fires and been replaced. This one owes me nothing. I'm a widow. They let him out just a few days later. He's refused treatment. He appears calm, so they let him out, and I'm scared. He comes to my house when I'm not there and takes all my clothes. I'm too afraid to go back and stop him from doing it. I change the locks and I get an AVO. Later on, he realises what he's doing and he seeks help. He has post-traumatic stress disorder. This man is not my husband. He's a situation that needs to be managed. I've learned his signs and I've learned his symptoms. I've developed strategies to manage. He sees his kids regularly, and I'm thankful to say that neither of us use them as pawns. They are so happy to see him. They love him and miss him so much. I look at my kids. So much has been taken from them. All have ongoing problems associated with their grief. They're in counselling. They dream. And my eldest son has become violent towards my younger son. It's sibling abuse. But as Joe improves, they improve. They realise that he will continue to be part of their life. All I can do as a mum is make sure that nothing comes between them and their dad, especially me, that they are reminded that he's a good man who loves them, even when he's not around, and try very hard not to say a bad word. There is no excuse for family violence. Although the violence wasn't physical, it was nonetheless devastating, but there is something we can do. We need to protect women and children. We need to make them feel strong. We need to give them a sense of power and identity. Understanding the situation of women in disaster is unique. Women want to help and protect their men. Give them the tools to do it. And when that fails, give them the support they need to get out. Mostly, we need to destigmatise mental health issues for men. It's okay to cry. It's okay. People who face disasters, especially on a scale like Saturday, have been through enough. Family violence just continues that trauma. Let the trauma end. Let it stop. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Linda Hager, or Hags to Friendly People, and I'd like to start with a disclaimer. In one of the brochures for this conference, it reads, mother of three, grandmother of another three, and lived with her partner for 38 years until the fire came. My fault, I wrote that. It sounds like he died or we separated. But I forgot to put the next bit in after that. My partner didn't die, but we did almost separate a number of times. However, the couple of years that followed the fire sometimes made me wish we stood still and let it take us, because this was bloody hell. The divine man I once knew had vanished along with our income, and as though he'd slipped behind a soundproof glass wall, and he couldn't hear me calling him. What I hope to get across today is that even the most stable, the happiest, and I think Sharon's done that already, but it's the same here, the most secure relationships, the ones most unlikely to experience domestic violence, are very likely to face it in some form in the aftermath of disaster. And if it could happen to us, which I couldn't believe, surely it had to be happening everywhere to almost anyone in the region. And I know all of you know that already, but it bewildered the shit out of me. How could it happen to us? Pre-disaster, we were always secure. Ever since I met him when I was 14 at high school. I know I look like I get around, but he's actually my only boyfriend. It was only me that could see that we were in trouble, because he can give the appearance that all's well to everybody else. The disaster and the multitude of varied consequences of it caused our problems. And as much as it sounds like I might be excusing aggression, I'm not. I'm blaming him for being stubborn, for not getting help with his anxiety when it was offered over and over and over again. That's his own fault, yeah. The person I was faced with at home was an alien to me, with disturbing switches, triggers that would snap him from his former gentle, generous and compassionate nature into something animalistic, like a snarling, snapping dog that had been cornered. This stranger in my life was broken, and even our overly sensitive dog was confused and biting us. The dog would pick up his constant fear and anxiety, and the dog started to cringe and attack. It set off old triggers in me too, subconscious childhood battles. And there were many times I bit him back. Husband, not the dog. And I would bite because I was conditioned to fight for survival. And he would sit there and not react. And so extremely out of character for him, because he used to be a clean freak. He would wash or shave or even move from the couch, and he would block out anything that was a challenge. When he wasn't being angry, he was blank. Hints at seeking assistance for depression met with either lashed out aggression or nothingness. Fight or flight, no in between. Triggers were constant. It could be a tree falling, and this is for me too, a siren, a whiff of smoke from someone burning off, someone mentioning something. But one time, soon after the fire, we had to go to a family function an hour away, and I was already tense about leaving the mountain. And not because it was in Ringwood, which admittedly strikes a sense of panic in anybody. It was because now home was the only place I felt safe. Strangely, when it was the place we weren't safe in only months before. And as I was getting ready, I was aware of a vivid sunset, and judging by the low orange glow through the bathroom blinds, and it didn't actually require any more thought other than, oh, pretty. But I was not prepared for the first actual sight of it. The first glimpse of this fiery sunset through the blackened skeletons of bush on our property. It looked like a monster fire, right here, right now, minutes to spare. And the image of it, as I opened the front door to leave, thumped me like a brick in the stern, and I just hit the deck. And I literally hit the deck. I dropped to my knees onto the concrete pavers just outside the door. And the concrete embedded my new tights into my very old knees, and I was lucky that I had a skirt on, you know, to cover the mess for the rest of the evening. And hubby, who's waiting in the car, in the driver's seat with the motor running, just staring blankly in my direction, perhaps thought I was just being my usual klutzy self, when I suddenly disappeared below his view. And I thought, well, I must be being a klutz as well, because I couldn't quite describe the feeling in, you know, the grip that made me fall down. And plus I was angry, because he still had no reaction. He didn't even laugh. I mean, I would have laughed at that, it would have looked ridiculous. And I didn't know I was actually having a panic attack. And I didn't know he was having panic attacks every 5 minutes of the day. And, you know, we had defensive words backwards and forwards over that, and why didn't you get out of the car and help me while I was laying on the ground? And he said, well, I didn't know you hurt yourself. But I called out to you while I was on the ground. In our historic timeline, we've got BC and AD, that's before crisis and after destruction. In our BC days, we rarely argued, but now we seem to be arguing every single day. So why don't you think? Why would I be on the ground asking and calling out for help? Why didn't you get out of the car? Why didn't you help me sort out the bank and the mortgage and the phone's being cut off again? Why did you just freeze me at the gate when the fire was coming in and I yelled, open the fucking gate? And I'm sick of this and you never listen to me. Still no reaction. Well, I didn't hear you. And on thinking back, it was probably true because he lost half of his hearing from the roar and the pressure of fighting the fire close up. Sorry, I get a little bit teary when I think about it because I stood behind him taking photos because I'm a dick. And I thought, no one's going to believe it. Snap, snap, snap. I've got heaps of photos. This photo. Okay, see, that helps. A bit of a giggle. And I didn't take that into account, but you know, I was in panic mode, he was in panic mode, you know, the hideous fight on the way. So fight or flight, and I'd be on his back trying to convince him, get help, da da da. I kept trying to coax him to do the same, and he was biting me really hard, and it really hurt. And again, I am not excusing aggression, far from it, but it became evident that sometimes some people morph into something they're not, simply by absorbing their immediate bad environment. In the worst affected disaster areas, anger, anxiety and depression spread like a plague. Everywhere you look, everywhere you go, every neighbour, every friend, business, group, all living every minute in the shadow of a devastated environment, and it made lots of formerly well people very unwell people. People simply running, you know, they're a mirror to their immediate surrounds. It's damaged, and they are running on animal instinct. And we joined the rest of the township like a flock of nervy starlings, hyper-vigilant and darting in unison at the slightest perception of threat. What? When's the cut-off? What form? When did I miss the cut? It was just, everyone was like this. Someone would go, nice dress. It was just crazy birds. Still a little bit that way too. People took on characteristics, can't even speak now, characteristics of animals. My husband with his cornered savage dog responds, me like a wombat, intent and immovable on my path, dumbly barging through, not knowing what trouble I could forge for myself. Plenty of that. And if I wasn't being a wombat with my steadfast, rounded, hard ass, I was a startled joey, trying to escape things like sunsets and smashing blindly into wire fences. Our triggers that set people off, other ones, were news of earthquakes, tsunamis, people dying in floods somewhere in the world, because within an instant you knew you had the full picture of what those poor buggers were going to have to go through, what they would endure in the coming months and years, the aggression, the violence, and it doesn't only come from within their own families. I certainly was not the only woman in my area to come up against bullying and aggression outside of their own home at the mercy of mostly angry men, some women, but from within your own community when you're trying to rebuild the damn thing. And time does not permit me today to detail numerous incidents of ugly bullying, so I'll condense it by saying some people have their own agenda as a first priority. Bugger me, what a surprise. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, I'm sure. So whether it be a political agenda, commercial, religious, when there's a lot of money at stake, and entree the bullying tactics and character assassinations, 2 and 2 can equal whatever you want it to be. So yeah, post-disaster, there isn't only violence in the home, it's inherent in the hometown as well. Back in my heartbroken home front, it was after one of my husband's outbursts that started with a simple question about his cooking. He used to love that. We'd chat over his cooking with a glass of wine and whip up one of his specialties, and now he was cooking like he had to and not like he wanted to, and ended up with the dinner in the bin because he couldn't handle the question, smells great, what are you cooking? 6 words, too much input. Mind you, this is coming from me, a person who can't answer a phone and walk through the door at the same time. I had to spell it out clearly and simply to him. It was about two of my loveliest friends, M and D, from home, my hometown, who'd both been subjected to some really ugly aggression from their partners. So I said to him, hey, you know that big new house that they've just finished up on Common Road, and you know how that's up for rent? Well, the girls and I have decided we're applying for that tomorrow. We're going to live there together, and don't worry, none of us will sell our properties, so you guys can deal with your depression in the way that you want. We're not being held down in the muck with you while you do it anymore. See ya. That was the turning point in our relationship. From that moment I saw the light in his eyes change, because he knew this time I was deadly serious, with a solid plan. And he started trusting me to help him find the assistance he needed. And I still hear about violence from other local women every second week. I do. We're doing pretty well now, my partner and I, with the help that he's getting and that I have been getting, but sudden glimpses of sunset still take my breath away for the wrong reason. But I've since learned with my EFT, you know, the emotional freedom technique, guys, I love that, it's great. I am so scared of you, I'm shitting myself. Oh, it's brilliant. So, you know, then if I do that, I don't drop like one of those Tennessee fainting goats. You've seen those, they're hilarious. Or worse, bite someone else. And I've bitten some people. Now, look, I carry this little book around with me, and its wisdom helps me handle more than I ever could. It was given to me by its author, Meg Wheatley, who has extensive experience in assisting communities in disaster recovery all over the world. And I'd like to share, in closing, one of her short pieces. And she likes the animal instinct thing too, and this one she calls, oh, thank you, honey. You know stuff. It's been a while. Thanks, now Lee. She calls it Raven, teach me to ride the winds of change. Perch where the wind comes at you full force. Let it blow you apart till your feathers fly off and you look like hell. Then abandon yourself. The wind is not your enemy, nothing in life is. Go where wind takes you, higher, lower, backwards. The wind to carry you forward will find you when you're ready, when you can bear it. Wow, that's it, I did it. Cool.